The blizzard came down like God's own fury across the Montana wilderness, each snowflake a frozen bullet cutting through the February darkness. Jackson Reed pulled the collar of his sheepskin coat higher as he guided his black stallion through the white hell that had swallowed the world whole. The wind howled like something wounded and dying, drowning out even the steady rhythm of hoofbeats on frozen ground. He had been checking the northern fence line of his 100,000-acre ranch when the storm hit without warning, the kind of weather that could kill a man in minutes if he lost his way. Jackson was no ordinary rancher. His leather boots were custom-made Italian, his watch worth more than most men's houses, and somewhere in the private hangar, 30 miles south, sat his Gulfstream jet, gleaming white and gold like a metal bird dreaming of warmer skies. Oil money had made him rich beyond measure, but the land had made him what he was, hard, solitary, and careful with trust. At 35, he had buried 2 wives, lost countless friends to greed and jealousy, and learned that in this world the only thing a man could count on was the ground beneath his feet and the gun on his hip. The horse stumbled suddenly, ears pricked forward in alarm. Jackson reined in, squinting through the driving snow, and that's when he saw it. A splash of navy blue against the pristine white, barely visible beneath a stand of snow-heavy pines. His heart clenched as he recognized the shape of a human body, motionless and half-buried in the drifts. He was off the horse before it fully stopped, boots sinking deep as he fought through the snow. The figure was small, delicate, wearing what looked like hospital scrubs beneath a thin winter coat that had done nothing to protect against nature's assault. A woman, young, her dark hair plastered to her skull with ice, lips blue-white with cold. Her skin was pale as the snow around her, but when he pressed his ear to her chest, he heard the faint, stubborn rhythm of a heart refusing to quit. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, stripping off his heavy coat without hesitation. "What the hell are you doing out here, girl?" She was unconscious, her body temperature so low she felt like carved marble in his arms. Ice crystals had formed on her eyelashes, and her breathing came in shallow, barely perceptible puffs. Jackson wrapped her in his coat, lifted her onto his horse, and held her tight against his chest as he turned toward home. The ride back to the main house took 40 minutes through the storm, 40 minutes during which he felt her body slowly warming against his, her head lolling against his shoulder like she was finally safe enough to let go completely. The Reed mansion sat like a fortress against the storm, all stone and timber and iron, built to last generations. Jackson carried her through the massive oak doors, past the oil paintings and crystal chandeliers that spoke of old money and older pain. He laid her on the leather sofa in his study, near the fireplace, where flames already danced against river stone, and began the careful work of saving a life. Her scrubs were soaked through, the fabric frozen to her skin in places. He peeled them away with clinical efficiency, his hands steady despite the way his pulse hammered in his throat. Hypothermia could kill in stages, and she was closer to the edge than he cared to think about. He wrapped her in wool blankets, rubbed her hands and feet to restore circulation, forced warm broth between her blue lips, drop by drop. For 3 days, she drifted in and out of consciousness like a ghost, deciding whether to stay or go. Jackson barely left her side, sleeping in the chair beside the sofa, monitoring her breathing, her color, the slow return of warmth to her extremities. When fever took her on the second night, he stayed awake until dawn, placing cool cloths on her forehead, and whispering words he didn't remember choosing, promises he didn't understand. On the morning of the 4th day, she opened her eyes. They were green as spring grass, wide and confused, darting around the unfamiliar room before settling on his face. She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows with a soft gasp of pain. "Easy," Jackson said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You've been through hell and back." She stared at him for a long moment, taking in his weathered face, the grey threading through his dark hair, the expensive watch on his wrist that caught the firelight. "Where am I?" Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from days of silence. "My ranch. Found you in the snow 4 days ago, near froze to death." He poured water from a crystal pitcher, held the glass to her lips. "You want to tell me what you were doing out there in nothing but scrubs and a prayer?" She drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. There was something in her gaze, a wariness that spoke of recent pain, fresh wounds that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm a nurse," she said finally. Sarah Mitchell. I was running." Jackson leaned back in his chair, studying her face in the firelight. She was beautiful in a quiet way, the kind of beauty that snuck up on a man when he wasn't looking. High cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it knew how to smile even if it hadn't in a while, and those eyes that seemed to hold secrets. Running from what? She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she'd drifted back to sleep. Then she spoke, so quietly he had to lean forward to hear. "My ex-husband, Dr. Marcus Webb. He was my supervisor at the hospital in Billings. When I tried to leave him, he made sure I could never work anywhere else. Destroyed my reputation, told lies about my competence, my character. Made it so no hospital in 3 states would hire me." Jackson's jaw tightened. He knew the type, had dealt with men who used power like a weapon, who crushed anything that dared to slip from their control. "So, you ran." "I had a job interview in Seattle, a small clinic that hadn't heard the stories yet, but my car broke down 50 miles from nowhere, and when I tried to walk for help..." She gestured weakly at herself, at the blankets that had saved her life. "The storm came out of nowhere." "That storm saved you," Jackson said quietly. "Another hour, and he would have found you." He didn't ask how he knew her ex-husband was hunting her. The haunted look in her eyes told him everything. "You're safe here. He won't find you." Over the following days, Sarah grew stronger. She moved from the sofa to the guest bedroom upstairs, ate meals at the massive dining table where Jackson usually sat alone, and slowly began to reclaim the pieces of herself that fear had scattered. She was quiet by nature but not broken, and Jackson found himself looking forward to their conversations over morning coffee. The way she listened when he talked about the land, the cattle, the weight of running an empire built on oil and earth. She was curious about everything. The Remington bronzes in his office, the private runway visible from the kitchen window, the framed photographs that showed a younger Jackson in places like Dubai and Dallas, always alone, always wearing the same careful mask. But she never pushed, never pried, and he found himself telling her things he'd never shared with anyone. "My first wife died in a car accident," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, whiskey warming his throat and honesty warming his chest. 22 years old, sweet as summer rain. "My second wife. Well, she loved my money more than she loved me. Took half of everything when she left with her yoga instructor." Sarah set down her tea, her eyes soft with understanding. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Taught me something important about trust." He looked at her then, really looked, and felt something shift in his chest. Most people see the money first, the man second, if they see him at all. "Money doesn't make a person," Sarah said quietly. "It just reveals who they already were." That night, Jackson lay awake thinking about green eyes and quiet wisdom, about the way she hummed while cooking, the way she'd been helping with the books without being asked, the way she looked at him like he was just a man instead of a bank account with legs. It was dangerous, this feeling growing in his chest, dangerous and terrifying and more real than anything he'd felt in years. But danger, as it turned out, was already on its way. The black Range Rover appeared at the main gate on a Tuesday morning, sleek and predatory against the snow-covered landscape. Jackson watched from his office window as it approached the house, and something cold settled in his stomach. He recognized the driver immediately. Marcus Webb, tall and silver-haired, and wearing the kind of confident smile that belonged on men who were used to getting what they wanted. Sarah was in the kitchen making breakfast when Jackson found her, her face pale as parchment when she saw the vehicle through the window. "He found me," she whispered, and the fear in her voice made Jackson's hands curl into fists. "Stay inside," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Let me handle this." Marcus Webb stepped out of his vehicle like he owned the ground he stood on, his expensive overcoat and polished shoes a stark contrast to the working ranch around him. He was handsome in the way surgeons often were, all sharp angles and careful grooming, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator who'd found his prey. "Mr. Reed," Marcus called out as Jackson emerged from the house, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jackson stopped 10 feet away, his thumbs hooked in his belt, every inch the cowboy, despite the wealth that could buy and sell most small countries. "Don't believe I do." Marcus's smile never wavered. "My wife, Sarah, she's sick, you understand. Delusional. Has these episodes where she runs away, makes up stories about abuse. I'm just here to take her home, get her the help she needs." "Funny thing about delusions," Jackson said slowly. "They tend to disappear when the source of stress is removed." The smile flickered then, just for a moment, and Jackson caught a glimpse of the man beneath the mask. "I don't think you understand the situation, Mr. Reed. Sarah is my wife. Legally, she belongs with me, and I have the authority to have her committed if necessary." "See, that's where you're wrong," Jackson said, his voice deadly quiet. "Because Sarah filed for divorce 6 months ago. Papers are sitting in the Billings courthouse, just waiting for a judge's signature. So legally, she doesn't belong to anybody but herself." Marcus's face darkened, the polished veneer cracking like ice in spring. "You've been busy. Man learns to do his homework when he's got something worth protecting." Jackson took a step forward, and Marcus took an involuntary step back. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to get back in that fancy car, drive back to whatever hole you crawled out of, and forget you ever knew a woman named Sarah Mitchell. And if I hear you've been spreading lies about her, if I hear you've so much as mentioned her name in a professional context, I'll make sure every hospital board in the country knows exactly what kind of man you really are." "You don't have that kind of power," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jackson smiled then, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Son, I've got enough money to buy 3 hospitals and staff them with whoever I please. I've got lawyers who eat men like you for breakfast and politicians who owe me favors. You want to test how far my reach extends?" For a long moment, they stared at each other across the frozen ground. Then Marcus looked past Jackson toward the house, where Sarah stood silhouetted in the kitchen window, and his expression turned ugly. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes," Jackson said quietly, "it is." After Marcus left, Jackson found Sarah sitting on the couch in his study, staring into the fire with tears streaming down her face. He sat beside her, careful not to crowd her, and waited for her to speak. "He'll come back," she said finally. "He always comes back. He can't stand losing, can't stand not having control. Then we'll be ready for him." She turned to look at him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, thinking about loneliness and second chances and the way her laugh sounded like music in the empty halls of his house. "Because," he said finally, "I've spent my whole life building walls to keep people out, but you just walked through them like they weren't even there." That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Sarah knocked on Jackson's bedroom door. He opened it to find her standing in the hallway in an oversized flannel shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders, vulnerability and determination warring in her eyes. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she said simply. He stepped aside to let her in, and she curled up beside him on the massive bed, her head on his chest, her breathing gradually slowing as she finally felt safe enough to truly rest. Jackson lay awake for hours, holding her, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to have her there. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and revealing the green promise of new growth beneath. Sarah's divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in April, and that evening Jackson took her flying in his jet, soaring over the mountains and valleys that stretched endlessly below them. She pressed her face to the window like a child seeing magic for the first time, and Jackson knew he was lost. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," she breathed, watching the sunset paint the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. "Neither have I," Jackson said, but he wasn't looking out the window. They were married in June, a small ceremony in the chapel on his land, with only a handful of close friends in attendance. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress, simple white lace that made her look like an angel, and when she said his name during the vows, Jackson felt something in his chest that had been frozen for years finally begin to thaw. Marcus Webb made one final attempt to destroy her, spreading vicious rumors about her competence and character to the medical board. But Jackson's lawyers were waiting, armed with evidence of harassment and witness testimonies that painted a clear picture of an abusive ex-husband's revenge. Marcus lost his medical license and disappeared from their lives as suddenly as he'd entered them. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the nursery of their home, a converted bedroom filled with soft colors and gentle light, cradling their newborn daughter against her chest. The baby had Jackson's dark hair and Sarah's green eyes, and when she looked up at her parents, she seemed to hold all the promise of the world in her tiny hands. "What should we call her?" Sarah asked, her voice soft with wonder. Jackson reached out to touch his daughter's cheek, his weathered rancher's hands gentle as butterfly wings. "Hope," he said quietly. "Her name is Hope." Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. The private jet sat silent in its hangar, no longer a symbol of escape, but of the journeys they would take together. And in the nursery, where love had taken root like wildflowers after rain, 3 hearts beat in perfect rhythm, creating a melody that would echo through generations. Sarah had been running when the storm found her, broken and desperate, and certain that safety was just another word for something that happened to other people. But sometimes the coldest nights lead to the warmest mornings, and sometimes being lost is just another way of finding exactly where you belong. The cowboy with the private jet had rescued a nurse from the snow, but in the end, she had been the one to save him, teaching him that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in oil wells or bank accounts, but in the quiet moments when 2 damaged souls decide to heal together, one gentle touch at a time. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you that love can bloom even in the coldest winters, then subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of unlikely romance, second chances, and love that defies every odd. From mountain storms to whispered promises, every story is crafted to stay with you long after the final word, where private jets meet pickup trucks and hearts find their way home. Subscribe now and never miss a heartbeat from the modern Wild West.